If you are at the bleeding edge of classic gaming, then you've heard of MiSTer, the open source FPGA-based emulation platform based on the fundamental goal of hardware accuracy. MiSTer already has tons of cores spanning 8 to 32-bit consoles, home computers, arcade games, and more. In this series, I'll feature one FPGA core every day for the next 21 days to ring in the new year. This is Atari Tetris by misterx-b, the real arcade game. Here's another fantastic core by misterx-b. Mr. X has done a ton of MiSTer cores that I mentioned previously in my Dig Dug episode of this series. Today we're talking about Tetris though, the real arcade game. And this is an original core by Mr. X with a cycle-accurate Pokey Soft core for the audio by Mark Watson. This is the real arcade Tetris, not one of those puny home ports. This is the real thing. This is the version that Tengen Tetris is designed to mimic, which many people, excluding myself, consider to be the best NES Tetris. For me, Tetris was the first game I really got into as a kid, because one of my childhood babysitters had it, but we would only get to play it on very, very special occasions. Her TV was for soap operas, period. I remember sitting close to the screen and looking at the pixel grid, and getting zapped by it. I wrote a haiku about that at one point. You want to hear it? I didn't think so. I also remember that everyone would get mad if you started on a lower level, because it took so long for you to finish. Maybe that's where I got this weird habit of jumping into puzzle games at the highest level possible, and usually at the fastest mode possible. Anyways, I'm still mesmerized by this game, and now that I have the arcade version in front of me, I've come to appreciate its superiority. With a nice CRT filter on, it still has a bit of that NES look that I love. I still do believe that NES Tetris is the most beautiful looking video game ever created by humans, but the arcade and Tengen versions, I have to admit, do play better. And they support competitive mode, most importantly. The ultimate Tetris to me would be an NES palette hack of this arcade game, which may be coming actually, but more on that in the future. Mr. X modeled this after the real arcade PCB, and like most of MiSTer's cores, it's accurate enough to best even the tightest software-based emulation. And it's going to become the new standard for competitive arcade Tetris players to practice on at home, once the word gets out at least. It is tight. It probably has the lowest input latency of any home version of Tetris in history. With your favorite joystick or controller, you can do surgery in this, and that is the essential ingredient to an enjoyable game. A lot of people think they're not good at this game, and that's probably because they're more sensitive to input lag than they think. There's no greater example of a pick-up-and-play arcade game than this. Anyone on Earth who speaks any language and is older than maybe the age of 4 can jump straight in, and after 10 minutes you can start to blast away even in hard mode. And that's why Tetris took over the world. The Pokey chip is legendary for its beautiful Atari sound, and here it really shines. The real chiptune music and sound effects are just killer. And the music itself seems to be sentient somehow, but I can't put my finger on that exactly. There are little animations everywhere, and this is not some cheap home port like so many of the Tetrises are. One day we'll likely have the original Electronica 60 version of Tetris, since MiSTer is already home to a number of cycle-accurate Russian home computers, including a great Electronica BK0010 and BK0011M core. But that original Tetris will be a mere curiosity, of course, compared to this. Or even compared to the NES versions for that matter. It may have been the original, but it was the sketch of an idea that needed more power, better music, and a wider color palette. Everything the arcade and NES versions deliver, in other words. Weirdly enough, I collect and restore Russian Electronica vacuum fluorescent display clocks, so I'm all about more Electronica cores. What can you say about Tetris? It's the definitive puzzle game that never feels dated, and playing it today, I'd argue that it's only improved with time. On a CRT, it's a sight to behold. It's stunning. I had Atari Tetris on my radar of arcade PCBs to buy for years now, but this core easily knocks that off my list. One less thing to buy. And remember that just like with real arcade PCBs, you can essentially swap out the EPROMs in MiSTer by loading a new ROM. So we have multiple revisions, hacks, and regions of ROMs for the arcade cores in MiSTer. In Tetris, that means you can swap out the regular ROMs for the cocktail mode ROMs. You don't have to buy a cocktail PCB or desolder the EPROMs. That really makes it perfect for people who want to build a custom arcade table or a real cocktail cabinet at home. And Sultan G42 has even made vertical scanline options, which is perfect in cocktail mode because it's rotated. Anyways, you have Tetris, the real thing. Let that sink in for a second. If you don't have a MiSTer yet, get one, and then you'll have Tetris too. Forget the silly graphics and disgusting input latency problems that modern ports are plagued by. This is pure, perfected Tetris. Maybe one day we'll be talking about other great Tetris arcade versions on MiSTer, like some of the incredible Tetris Grandmasters, but this is the one you'll always come back to. That's my look at one of my favorite arcade cores, Tetris by misterx-b. What core will I feature next? Find out tomorrow in my next video as my MiSTer countdown continues. This video represents a snapshot of the core as it exists today, but by the time you're watching this in the future, it may have been improved or expanded with new features. Hit the subscribe button to be kept up to date with all the latest MiSTer happenings, and ring the bell to be notified when I go live for a stream. If you like the channel, consider supporting it. Patreon support at any level gets you an instant invite to the SmokeMonster Elite Discord and early access to my videos. Thank you so much for your support, I really appreciate it.